With inflation being so high and hearing so much talk about a recession, it's only fair to ask yourself the question of whether or not it's a good time to buy a house right now. So in this video, I want to go over 3 reasons why I believe it is still a great time to buy a house right now, recession and all. But on the flip side, I'll also mention a few possible cons or risks of buying right now, just so that you know both sides and so that you can make the best decision for yourself. I'm Angie Blanco, a realtor here in Miami, Florida with One Path Realty. Let's get into it. Reason number 1. Today, there is less competition for buyers than there was just a year ago. It's been a solid seller's market for the past couple of years, and even though we're still considered to be in a seller's market today, we've started to see a shift in the market favoring buyers a little more than before. Sellers are starting to price their homes more accurately, homes are sitting on the market a little longer than before, so we're starting to see more price reductions, and some buyers have even backed out entirely and are not purchasing at all. And all of this is mainly due to the spike in interest rates, which just about doubled in less than a year. All through 2020, 2021, and even in the beginning of this year in 2022, interest rates were in the 2 to 3% range. Around March though, they passed the 4% mark, continued creeping up, hitting a high of 5.81% in June. That's a huge factor in this shift that we're experiencing right now and in the decrease of buyer competition. That can potentially be something very positive for today's buyers, especially for those who could not get their hands on a property before because they were either getting outbid or there just weren't enough options with their criteria. Now might be an opportunity. The fact that interest rates went so high in such a short period of time is really what caused so many buyers to take a back seat, either because they were priced out of the market and could no longer qualify or just by choice. Either way though, this has softened the buyer pool so much that we're no longer seeing so many bidding wars, buyers paying over appraisals, or them waiving inspection contingencies. And that being the case, sellers are now having to get much more realistic about their asking price in order to attract the buyers that are still left in the market and who are still willing and able to purchase regardless of interest rates, inflation, and a recession. Like I mentioned in the beginning of this video though, we are still considered to be in a seller's market because the amount of inventory is still lower than the amount of demand. But there is no doubt that we're definitely seeing a very obvious shift here that we haven't seen for the last couple of years. Which brings me to reason number 2. Because of this shift and the competition being so much lower today, buyers have more power to negotiate than they did before. We're seeing more seller contributions, more repair credits, more extensions if needed, more flexibility with terms, and more contingencies being accepted, like inspection and appraisal contingencies. And that is huge. A year ago, adding an appraisal contingency was basically a safe bet that you were not getting your offer accepted. Today though, they are being accepted and a lot of times honored, which means that if you're under contract for say $500,000 and the appraisal comes in at $480,000, it's much more likely that a seller will accept or at least consider that appraised value of $480,000 instead of just sticking to their guns about the $500,000 because they've got a line out the door of other buyers who want it and can afford it. Now, of course, this is not a guarantee and every property is completely different because it could still be that there is in fact competition for a particular house, depending on location, price, conditions, and so on. But I have been seeing it more and more often than I was before. A year ago, yes, interest rates were in the 3%, but it was also not uncommon to see a buyer pay $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 or more over an appraisal just to beat the bidding war. That's not happening as much today. Now we're seeing buyers purchasing homes for much closer to what they're actually worth, closer to the appraised values, and in some cases for even less than what they appraised for. Again though, always on a case-by-case basis and always being strategic about it. Reason number 3, regardless of the interest rates, inflation, or recession, you are locking in a housing payment. No matter what the housing market does or what the economy does, you need a place to sleep. You need shelter and a place to go home to. And this being the case, I think that one of the smartest things to do during a recession or during a time that's unstable is to make sure that all of your bills, your payments, and your financial responsibilities are as stable and unchanging as possible. And one of the best ways of doing this, in my opinion, is by locking in a housing payment to have a fixed rate mortgage at a price that you can comfortably afford month after month, and that does not change. This is the concern that I have with renting. Rents increase year over year and a lot of times are more expensive than a mortgage payment for a property of a similar kind. This means that regardless of what the economy does and how hard it may get for some people, their rent price is not guaranteed come time to renew their lease. Also, there's really no telling how long a landlord will allow a renter to live in their property. I've seen tenants who've had to move out of a place after living there for 5 or 10 years because now the seller has decided to sell, or they're moving a family member in, or they've just decided not to renew for whatever the reason. There are a lot of these what ifs with renting that I think can be avoided altogether by purchasing your own space. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy, just something that works and that you can afford and that you can predict month over month. I think it's always important to be as stable as possible, but even more so in a time like now. Okay, like I mentioned earlier, I did also want to touch on a couple of potential cons or risks of buying a property right now, just so that you're aware of both sides. The first risk is that buying is not exactly cheap, and during a recession, ideally, you want to be as liquid as possible and have as many funds available as possible just in case of any emergency. It's said that you should have at least between 3 to 6 months of your living expenses saved for any worst case scenario or just something that you weren't expecting. So if you decided to purchase right now, you'll likely be heavily eating into this savings account and leaving you with much less. It really depends on how much you have saved and how much risk you're willing to take. If a property won't wipe you out completely, you're getting a solid deal on a property and you have predictable income, then it might not be such a bad idea. But if all you have are $15,000 and you're starting to see people getting laid off at your job, then I would probably think a little longer about it, especially if you have a family and people who depend on you. The second risk ties into the first one, which is job instability. During a recession, it's common to see layoffs, and unfortunately, we've already seen employers cutting back on costs, expenses, and payroll, which means that if you buy a property now and in 3 months you get laid off, you are still going to have a mortgage payment, but with no income, if that's your only source of income. If you have more control over your income, like a contract at your job, or you are the employer, then I'd say it'd be a safer bet, all while still making sure that you're getting a solid deal and one that comfortably fits your needs, whether it be a primary home or an investment property. This all being said, pros and cons included, I still think a recession brings great opportunity to invest and to buy into real estate. Housing is one of our basic needs for survival, so it's always going to be in demand, whether it be to purchase or to rent. Also, in the long run, real estate values have always increased, even after its short down cycles. Take a look at this graph, for example. Even during the lowest point in 2009, prices have more than doubled since then. Now, I don't think we're going to see such a decline like we did back then, just because, like I mentioned earlier, we're still considered to be in a seller's market because the demand is still higher than the supply, especially in Miami. But this just goes to show that in the long term and in general, real estate always rises. If you have any questions for me, feel free to reach out. All my information is down in the description. I would love to hear from you. Also, if you, like so many other people, are wondering if the housing market is going to crash in 2022, then watch this video here where I give you my thoughts and my opinion on the topic. Happy watching, and I will see you on the next one.